In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get started with one of the most beautiful flowers in the world, dahlias. This video is sponsored by flowerbulbs.com, but more on that later. So dahlias, they are native to Mesoamerica, so Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, but really well known in the high plains of Mexico, where they are the national flower, and they are insane. There are 40 different species of dahlia, and believe it or not, 57,000 different cultivars for one specific reason. Dahlias are in the same family as sunflowers, daisies, and zinnia, but they have something really incredible that few plants share, and that would be they have 8 sets of homologous chromosomes, which is a botanically nerdy way of saying way more ways that those genetics can be combined to form some of the incredible variants in height, size, flower shape, color, etc. that you see. That's why there are 57,000 different cultivars, because they breed so readily. You would think with that many varieties, tens of thousands, that there would be a blue dahlia, but in fact that is still currently genetically impossible to produce a true blue dahlia. In fact, in 1846, there was a competition to see if any breeder out there could develop one, and while people have gotten close, there is still no such thing as a true blue dahlia. So if that ever comes out, you better believe I'll be growing it. When the Spanish first came to Mexico and discovered the dahlia, the native peoples there were using it not just as a beautiful flower, but also cutting the stems and using those as straws. And then of course the tubers are actually edible, whether they're gathered from the wild or cultivated for that purpose. Dahlias made their way back to Europe in 1789 when the director of the Botanical Gardens of Mexico sent plant parts to the director of the Botanical Garden in Madrid, and they quickly spread throughout Europe to the point where the first new dahlia species in Europe was developed just about 15 years later in 1804. Because there are so many different types, the Royal Horticultural Society had to classify them into 14 different groups based on the flower shape and the florets. Single flowered, anemone flowered, collarette, water lily, decorative, ball, pompon, cactus, semi-cactus, miscellaneous, fimbriated, single orchid, double orchid, and peony flowered. What I'm getting at here, guys, is if you like a particular flower shape, size, or color besides blue, dahlias are the plant for you. So let's figure out how to plant them. Although you can cultivate dahlia from seed, and that's how all the breeding takes place, if you grow it from tubers or clusters of tubers, you're going to get a genetic copy of the plant last season. So it's a good way to preserve. Let's say I love this beautiful sort of orangish red dahlia. If I use that tuber and plant it somewhere else, I'll have the exact same plant come out next season. So let's take a look at this. This is a cluster of tubers. Here's an individual tuber off of the same one. This one just fell off. Now anatomically, you've got a tail. So this is the trailing off piece. You have the meat of the tuber right here, the neck, and then they all come together to form a crown. That crown is just where they all meet right before the main stalk, which in this example isn't quite clear. So I'll grab this example here and take a look how all of the dahlia tuber necks kind of cluster right here. And you've got this little chopped off main stalk that would have shot up, and that's where all the growth would come out of. So the magic piece you really want to be looking for are the eyes coming out right around that crown point. This is where the new growth, and on this variety, you can even see that new growth coming in. That is the special sauce when planting a tuber. If you want to plant by tuber, you can do it 2 ways. You can plant the entire clump, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The benefit of that is that you're guaranteed going to get something that comes up. If I just plant one tuber like this, well, if it doesn't have an eye, then it won't come up at all. This one does. But if something goes wrong with it, you're just going to have a little patch where nothing comes out. So if I really wanted to split this up into its own single tubers, I just need to make sure that I'm including an eye on every single one. So I've got an eye right there. I'm gonna go ahead and make a chop. This one should be completely fine. So should this one. And as long as I've got an eye, again, I'm good. So, you know, it might be tempting, let's say, to cut this tuber off right where it starts to neck. But if I did that, I'd be missing this little piece right here, which of course is how it's going to grow. So again, being very delicate, coming through and chopping it off right about there. I've got the tuber, I've got the eye, I'm good to go. But if you're in a warm zone, zones 8+, you can just plant this and then leave it in the ground, ideally forever. It'll just keep coming up over and over again over the seasons. It just doesn't get cold enough to freeze the tuber and damage them over the winter. In a cold zone, you're gonna have to dig them up if you wanna preserve them. I will say, these probably run about the same cost as your annual ornamental plants. So if you want to not deal with it, go ahead and just leave them in the ground. They'll die, you can replant them, no big deal. Of course, you're just gonna have to pay a little more for that. So let's get to planting these guys. First, let's talk about how to plant a dahlia tuber in general, and I'm gonna use the raised bed as an example because it's basically just a huge container. So this would apply for container gardening as well. What you wanna do is select an area with 8+ hours of sunlight, rich, well-draining soil. They do not wanna sit in moisture to the point where I'm actually not even gonna water these in after I plant them in. So what I wanna do, if I'm just doing a single tuber like this, is I'm gonna grab it, I'm gonna lay it on its side, and I'm gonna look for the eye to be pointing upwards. It doesn't really matter that much, but if we're being particular, pointing upwards is gonna give it an easier shot at life. So in I go, about 4 to 6 inches deep. I don't need to get too fancy or too precious here. I've cleared that area out. Let me go ahead and orient. In I go, facing to the side. Most of these you wanna give at least about 18 inches or so. And timing wise, you need to wait until the soil is 60 Fahrenheit or 15 Celsius or warmer. Up until that point, you can still grow dahlias, but you can grow them in little containers. So you could plant this tuber in a small container, let it size up, even put it under a heat mat, kind of like you do with a tomato before you plant it out, and then go ahead and transplant it out. It really doesn't want to deal with too cold of soil temps. Clump wise, I'm just going to orient it like this. I'm just gonna kind of drop the clump right in, not stress too much, plant it probably just a tad deeper, and then backfill around it. Now I've got a couple different varieties, because why plant the same thing? This one here is Color Spectacle. Whoop, this is a semi-cactus variety. So I'll go in with another clump right here. This is that main stalk. So again, maybe point that guy up. Here I'll go in with the Temple of Beauty, a decorative. With 57,000 cultivars, I feel like I'd run out of things to call these. So I'm just gonna lay these out. I'll put a tuber here, so this will be the same 3 varieties. Trying to follow my own spacing rules. I feel like I always tend to space things too tight together. I need to just chill out and let the plants grow. So water-wise, when this starts to come up, you wanna give it about 1 inch of water a week. When they're really growing and blooming, 2 inches of water. So they don't want a lot of water when you plant them out, but as soon as they start to bloom, you really do wanna pick up on that watering. And you can, if you're growing pretty large varieties, actually throw a stake in at the same time as you plant, because you're gonna have to stake them anyways to keep them nice and upright. So what you could do is take like a bamboo stake and put it in at the same time, just to make sure you know it's gonna be perfectly oriented, but I wouldn't stress about that. I just think maybe it avoids hitting a tuber. But again, you could do it afterwards as well. Now, it's not too different when you're planting in the actual ground, but I'll show you a trick that helps a lot. So if you're gonna plant dahlias in the ground, which can be very beautiful, you can arrange them around a raised bed, in a pathway, or by a pathway, you wanna loosen up that soil. We've already loosened this patch. We're gonna plant about, I don't know, 400 dahlias in here, so we've loosened it up. But one way to do it is if you have something like a broad fork, you can just come in and do a brief little lift, because again, they don't want to be dealing with compacted, soggy soil. It's the surest way to fail with them. They'll rot out or get disease or something like that. So you can come in and loosen to about 10 inches or so, which this broad fork will do. You can of course just use a shovel or use a little trowel, and then you come in and bury about 4 to 6 inches deep. After you've planted your tubers, it's time to wait for them to grow. And when they get to this sort of stage, there's a couple things you can do. I mentioned staking. Take a look at this plant right here. It's in a small container, and there are 2 little bamboo stakes with just some twine to corral these blooms upwards and keep them nice and upright. Now, another thing you could do is prune. You could do a bit of a top or a clip. In this particular case on this variety, that didn't happen. What they could have done is at about a foot or so of growth, like maybe about here, you might have cut, similar to how you might prune basil to bush it up, right here, and this would have forced some bushiness out. So let's say you had a nice pot that was a bit wider and you wanted the plant also to be wide. Then what you would do is do that pruning method instead of coming upright like this. That's sort of just dealer's choice. It's however you want the plant to be expressed. By the way, all of these flower bulbs came from flowerbulbs.com, who is a sponsor of this video. You can take a look at them for information, for sourcing, and just for education. In fact, I had Peggy Ann Montgomery on the Epic Gardening podcast last year talking about not just dahlias, but all different types of flower bulbs, which is something I'm really trying to get into. I love my edible garden, but it is getting a little drab with not a lot of color besides green. So take a look at that. More care guides for flowers coming on the channel soon. Stay tuned, good luck in the garden, and keep on growing.